Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the studio. Well, this is the last video in my video about shooting modes. Now, what are the shooting modes? Well, if you have a DSLR or a mirrorless, they're the different modes that you can set on top of your camera. From auto to program to shutter priority to aperture priority, and today's manual. Now, it's funny because whenever I do videos, whenever I talk to people, they're always talking about shooting in manual, shooting in manual, shooting in manual. And 99% of the people out there, they know what manual is. Unfortunately, the majority of those people, they don't shoot in manual for various reasons. And I hear people always, it's almost like they're embarrassed to say they don't shoot in manual mode. But then when I talk to them, they don't understand what manual mode is. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it and let's break it down. So what is manual? Well, that's the mode that says M on your command dial. If you don't have a command dial, it may say it on the menu on the back or even on the top of the camera. Manual. What is it? It's just what it says it is. Manual is the camera sets nothing. You have full control over the camera. It is the exact opposite of the full auto modes on the camera or the scene modes on the camera. In manual mode, you control everything. Now, you can control in manual, you can set your camera to auto ISO. That's sort of taking it away from what manual was originally developed as. But you can do that if you want to. Why? Well, we'll maybe talk about that in a bit. Is it worth it? Well, we'll maybe talk about that in a bit as well. But manual is, the overall term is you set everything. The camera will still tell you if the image will be overexposed or underexposed on the light meter scale in the camera, but it won't adjust even if it knows you're going to screw up the picture. If you look at the meter, it will tell you. That's it. That's all. It's done. It's not going to override anything. That's good news and that's bad news. The good news is that you have full control. The bad news is you have full control. You can screw up pictures constantly. You can get amazing pictures constantly, depending upon you and only you. If you follow what the camera says, if you know your settings, great. If you don't, you'll be struggling. Now, the great news about manual is it's the most consistent mode on a camera. The bad news is about manual mode, it can be consistently bad all the time, as well as it can be consistently good. So that's what manual is. You set the shutter speed, you set the aperture, and you usually set the ISO as well. Like I said, you can leave ISO on auto, but that's sort of getting away from what manual was meant for. Now, it works. It works wonderful. In the studio here, that's the only mode I use because I set my shutter speed, I set my aperture, and I set my ISO for the lighting that I'm using. And I know that picture after picture after picture after picture after picture, they're going to come out perfectly exposed if I've set it correctly. I don't have to worry about anything because I know my studio lights are going to fire at the same power every time. I know my camera is going to expose at the same settings every time. So I'm good to go. It works wonderful. When I'm outside, if I'm in a same lighting situation, i.e. the light is not changing or I'm not going from light to dark, manual is great because you set your camera, you take pictures, and you can shoot 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 pictures. As long as the lighting doesn't change, they'll all be exposed exactly how you set your camera. As long as you've set it good, you're going to get great pictures. If you haven't set it good, you're going to get bad pictures. So that's what manual is for. It's great for doing astrophotography. It's great for doing people portraits. If I take my studio lights outside, it's great in those situations. It's great on a cloudy day or a bright day. It works inside, it works outside. It works in bright, it works in dark. It works, and it works. As long as the person taking the pictures has set the camera correctly. Now, as I've said in other videos, you have 3 settings that you can set to get a proper exposure. You have your shutter speed, you have your aperture, and you have your ISO. If you're setting all of those and you know what to set, great. So let's say I'm inside, I'm shooting in my studio with my studio lights. I know that at 1/25th of a second, I know at f8, and I know with my lights at the power that they're at 100 ISO, I will get 100% perfect exposure. If I shut my studio lights off and they don't fire, I know that it'll be just black. So if I want to shoot without studio lights, I'm going to be shooting down something like, 1/20th of a second at f4 at maybe 1000 ISO, 1600 ISO. I'm just grabbing some numbers here to get the proper exposure in my studio without my studio lights. But the good thing is that I can shoot picture after picture after picture after picture at that setting, and they'll all be the same if the lighting doesn't change. When I go outside, when I'm shooting families, same thing. Now, where does the problem come in? The problem comes in when the lighting conditions change. It can be as simple as the sun going behind a cloud. It can be as simple as something reflecting the sun moves a little bit, and the sun doesn't get reflected on there anymore. It can be simple things like that that will change your exposure. So you have to stay on top of it in manual mode. Astrophotography, it's great because you can set your ISO, you can set your shutter speed, you can set your aperture, you can take picture after picture after picture of the stars. And once you get your exposure set correct, they'll all be set correct for the rest of the night's shooting. You can go out and shoot waterfall pictures, and you know that once it's set, you can shoot over and over again, and as long as the lighting doesn't change, they'll be perfect. So manual is a great mode to use. So why don't people use it? Because you have to set everything. And if you don't set it correctly, you're going to get bad pictures. So let's talk about the ISO. On the newer cameras, you can set or leave your ISO set at auto. So what happens is you set your shutter speed, you set your aperture, and your ISO goes up and down accordingly. The camera tries to get you a proper exposure by adjusting the ISO. Unfortunately, in some situations, trying to shoot like that doesn't work. For me, again, especially in the studio with studio lights, I go to take a picture. I'll set it at my 1/25th of a second at f8. And the ISO will say, well, it's really dark in here, so I'm going to go up to 3200 or 6400 ISO. When it goes way up there, I take the picture, the studio lights go off, and they're overexposed. So that doesn't work in the studio. It also doesn't work depending upon what your subject is. Stars are a big one. The camera will see how dark it is, and if it's on auto ISO, it'll crank the ISO up ridiculously high, and all of a sudden you get bright, bright, bright stars, and the pictures are overexposed. So be careful with the auto ISO. Now, where have I used manual with the auto ISO? Go back again to my 150 to 600 lens. I will set that if I'm out shooting and the lighting is variable. Let's say it's a overcast day, but they're broken clouds. So it gets bright, it gets a little cloudy, it gets bright, it gets a little cloudy. I will set my shutter speed to around 1/500th or 1/600th of a second. I'll set my aperture to f9 because that's a sweet spot. And I will leave my ISO on auto. So if I'm shooting something, I'll start to take the picture. And if it gets a little bit cloudy, the ISO will go up. If it gets a little bit darker, the ISO will go up a bit higher. If it gets really bright, the ISO will drop down to help me maintain a consistent exposure. The problem with that is that it's variable. So if I'm expecting it to stay in one spot, it will change. And that is where people struggle big time shooting in manual. To get it to work correctly, set everything to manual. If you want to play with it, great. Play with the auto ISO. See if it helps you in your situation, but understand that's going to change constantly and it'll be less consistent pictures. And in some situations, flash, studio lights, different situations like that, it may actually be a big detriment to set it to auto ISO. So again, get out there, take some pictures. I hope this talk about different shooting modes has helped you. Take some pictures and enjoy your time doing it. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.